This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
This podcast is sponsored by The Forward. Stay up to date with unlimited access to news, culture, and opinion, all through a Jewish lens. And for our listeners, for 2NJB listeners, get 6 months of The Forward for only $10. That's 67% off. An exclusive subscription offer for our listeners, forward.com/2NJB, and get 6 months for $10. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, IsraelNationalNews.com. And last but not least, in collaboration with Australian Jewish News, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com. If you grew up in a religious or even a traditional Jewish home, this might sound familiar to you. It's dinner time on Tuesday night and you served yourself way more food than you can eat. Seeing that you didn't finish the food on your plate, your mother reprimands you with those 2 words, Bal Tashchit. Bal Tashchit is one of the 613 commandments in the Old Testament, and it literally translates to you shall not destroy, or you shall not waste. These 2 words are at the center of the Jewish debate on environmentalism. Today we're joined by Rabbi Yonatan Neril, co-author of Eco-Bible, a book on what the Bible has to say about ecology and creation care. We are happy to be joined by Rabbi Neril to talk about the environment, about climate change, and about what nice Jewish boys and girls should do to care for our planet. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here.
So is it really just Bal Tashchit? Does that sum it up, or are there more things the Torah has to say about the environment?
Well, that's actually why we published Eco-Bible. At least Volume 1 just came out last week on Genesis and Exodus, a commentary on 200 different verses. And then we're publishing Volume 2 on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy on another 250 verses. Some people think that Jewish ecology is just about Tu B'Shvat, about planting a tree once a year, maybe a little about Noah's Ark, and for some, Bal Tashchit. But part of what we've done with this book is shown that there's actually hundreds of verses where the Torah relates to ecological wisdom, and where the rabbinic sages from the past couple thousand years also share some very deep insights.
And if you had to sum it up, what do you think? If our listeners had to take one thing away from this, what is your perspective on what Judaism says on environmentalism? What our perspective on environmentalism should be?
Well, I'll just give you one example. It says in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, verse 15, "Vayanichehu began Eden le'ovdah u'leshomrah." God placed the human being in the Garden of Eden to serve it and to conserve it. That's how Rabbi Jonathan Sacks translates it. That we're supposed to be responsible. We're supposed to take responsibility for this amazing planet that God has put us in and given us life in. And we're supposed to treat it with respect. There's a Jewish teaching, a midrash, that says that God showed Adam all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, "Everything that I created for you. See how beautiful and praiseworthy are my works. Be careful not to degrade or destroy it, because if you do, there will be no one after you to repair it." And that's an important message.
But I'm completely secular. It's a disclaimer. So to me, I don't really resonate with this type of conversation because but I wonder, isn't the beauty of the Bible, it is so vague that almost any agenda, you can find justifications for it in the Bible?
Yes and no. There's some things that I think are flow more organically, and that's part of what we've done here in producing a commentary on 450 verses, is that it's not just an incidental theme. If you wanted to, what does the Bible say about brain surgery? Well, there isn't that much on there, but in terms of how do we relate to creation, how do we relate to the physical world, I think there is a lot there. In terms of what you said about being secular, so, I think that this book also has appeal to people who don't necessarily read the Bible very often, or maybe don't even believe in it. About 85% of people in the world consider themselves faith adherents. They may not be practicing every day, but over 6 billion people identify with a faith. And I think for some people who might consider themselves secular, this book also can sort of give them encouragement that religious communities are starting to get on board in addressing the ecological crisis. For the past 50 years, the ecological movement has been led by secular people. And I think because of that, because it hasn't really had the full participation of religious communities, there's been lacking, because most people in the world identify with a faith.
So this might be controversial, what I'm about to say, but today the discourse around climate change has been so politicized, right? And there's this, it's almost heretical, right? It's almost heresy to say and to question it or to say anything that might be doubtful of, right? So it's like, how could you question the consensus of the 97% and so on and so forth? There's this, and on the other side, it's like, well, this is science. How could you even right? There's also the rational, logical, scientific side, which says, well, I mean, there's evidence, and how could you not get on board with this? So it's become this very controversial, very politicized thing. And I wonder if you think that to listen to the wisdom that Judaism has on the environment that it bestows upon us, on how we should look at the way we care for our planet, if that means that we have to necessarily believe this is a crisis that we're in the midst of, if it means that we have to somehow think something about climate change, or is there a way to just look at it, as a way of how do we live our day-to-day lives?
So I think the ecological crisis is much deeper than many people think. Climate change is just one symptom of it. My wife and my 2 kids and I, our 2 kids, we went swimming in the Mediterranean at Nachsholim about 2 months ago. And for the first time in my life, when I went into the water, I saw I couldn't swim without encountering plastic.
Oh, I thought it was going to jellyfish.
So we were there in late August after the jellyfish season.
Okay.
And it was amazing because, I'd never seen so much plastic in the sea before. And some people think, oh, well, this is just plastic that came from people littering on the beach, which actually is not the case, because people weren't littering very much on that beach. We're dealing with ecological challenges that are finally showing up for us in our day-to-day lives. And this is happening around the world because humanity is now approaching 8 billion people, and many billions of those people are consuming at a standard of material living that our ancestors could only dream about. So in terms of...
Or have nightmares about.
Yeah.
Possibly.
So in terms of what you're saying of how do people relate to climate change, so I think that it's actually, people who are skeptical or deny climate science, and the 97% of climate scientists, I think there's a deeper issue. It's really not about, the frequency of hurricanes and whether, getting into the nitty gritty of, is this because of volcanoes or because of a sunspot, even though the scientists are clear that it's human caused and it's getting worse and we need to do something about it. I think at a deeper level, the reaction that many people have is that if the ecological crisis is real, it means that we actually need to change our lifestyles. And for many people, the current lifestyle is very comfortable. It's very attractive, eating a lot of meat, flying places, driving a car wherever you want to go. And so to say that the ecological crisis is here is an inconvenient truth. It means we have to do something about it.
I see. But there are many byproducts of the way we live our lives today, and I guess the surplus in which we live our lives today you might argue aren't necessarily just comforts which we would have to forego. Like the fact that we drive cars and that we just heard an ambulance. The fact that we can get people to the hospital so fast is thanks to fossil fuels and electricity, and you know what I mean? So like there are
plastic.
And plastic, the fact that,
Yeah.
I don't know, everybody can afford dishware to eat on.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they
that
don't have to buy
surgeons can keep
expensive china or surgeons have, or we have
Sanitary
cheap
and-
medical
yeah.
equipment. So I wonder if, like, I mean, that I guess goes back to my question is like, I'm all about getting on board for a discussion about like, okay, what do I do about my excess materialism? And like, how do I not waste in my personal life? But I don't, like, do you believe that we're going to solve the climate crisis by everybody, I don't know, buying less shirts or throwing away less trash?
So I think that if we're really committed to living sustainably, then we will achieve that. Humanity can do if it has the will, if it has the ratzon, then we can achieve that. So in terms of curbing climate change, and in relation to what you said about the ambulance and surgical masks, so I would look. I'm not saying we need to go back to the Stone Age and living in caves. And I support ambulances driving people to hospitals and surgeons having masks to protect themselves. And I'm supportive of our reconsidering, for example, how much plastic we use. Right now in the lockdown, the semi-lockdown, there's only takeaway that's available. And after going to that beach and seeing so much plastic, I decided I am not going to order takeaway food from a restaurant that comes in disposable dishes. And so if I go to lunch near my office, I bring my own container and I say to the people working there, I'd like you to put the food in this container. If they're not willing to do so, then I'll go to a different place. This whole system we have of where everything we eat comes in plastic and actually many layers of packaging. That's a new system. That our grandparents didn't have such a system. Our grandparents had milk carts where they would go to the milk store and with their own bottles and return the bottles. So a different system is possible. It's just a question of, do we have the will to do that?
Mm-hmm. But is the problem with because when you went to the beach, the problem was that savages threw their garbage.
No, but that's what he's saying, that it's not people who threw their trash in the beach. It's actually plastic that just exists in the ocean. If I understand correctly, that's being washed up.
Well, humanity is producing so many millions of tons of plastic every year that we think when we throw away our garbage that it just sort of goes somewhere and we'll never see it again. But what's currently being revealed is that some of our garbage, as well as the garbage of people in Asia and Africa and Latin America and some of it North America, Europe, that garbage actually finds its way into the oceans. Some of it washes away in rainstorms. Some of it is actually, there's not garbage disposal systems for billions of people, and that washes into the oceans. And then people think, okay, well then in the oceans it's just going to stay there. Well, so part of it does stay in the oceans, and there's a huge Pacific garbage patch, which is about the size of Texas. But the sun actually breaks down some of the plastic.
How many electorats this garbage?
I'm not
what?
Electorats?
Like how many what's the constituency?
Yeah, there.
Yeah, right. How many electoral
Okay.
votes? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But actually, some of the garbage that we produce, the plastic breaks down. The sun breaks it down into microplastics, and then that goes. Then fish eat it, and then we eat those fish, and it ends up in our own systems. So part of the deeper message that I'm trying to communicate is that we're all connected. Everything is interdependent, and we're part of one system. And if I think that by consuming plastic, I just throw it away and it goes away, it doesn't go away. It actually comes back to me. That's like the plastic karma.
But if we're all connected, then if I change my habits, it's meaningless, because I'm connected to India and China. They will probably never change in Africa. So, batel b'shishim.
Good. So that's the $1 million question. Does one person make a difference? So according to one line of thinking, yeah, with almost 8 billion people, one person doesn't make much of a difference. But according to Jewish teachings, we need to think of our actions as if the whole world depends on us. The Rambam, Maimonides, taught that we need to think of the situation of the world as it's like balanced on a scale, that then it's like almost equally balanced, and our actions will tip the scale. So our actions do make a difference. And even if that's hard to understand, but we can also just think about it for ourselves. Even if what I'm doing doesn't make a difference in a global scale for plastic and climate change and biodiversity loss, but for my own truth, living in a place of truth, living in integrity with myself and the source of all being, the way that I live does matter.
So I want to take us back to the Bible for a second and talk about the Jewish perspective on ecology, because that is what the Eco Bible is about. So, I mean, where does Judaism land? Because from the little I know about Bal Tashchit, the little Jewish education I got in high school, like, I don't know, over a decade ago, I think we really, I remember this like from like 10th grade Talmud studies, but that Bal Tashchit, there was, I mean, the place it comes from is Deuteronomy, right? Where there's the Ki Adam Etz Hasadeh, right? Which is always misunderstood, right? Because people always say Ki Adam Etz Hasadeh, like the man is a tree of the field, but it's actually like asked ironically in the Bible, right? Like it's like the tree of the field is not a man, so you can't cut it down because Bal Tashchit or whatever. And then there's the whole discussion about can you just cut things down unnecessarily. But from what I remember is that if there is a need to cut it down, right, to if it doesn't bear fruit, right, then you can cut it down to create, whatever weapons or whatever you need for warfare. And then there was some debate in the Talmud about whether or not you can actually destroy things in order to fill some kind of need. And from what I remember, there was like a ruling that you can. Is that accurate or is that not?
Good. What a rabbi he could be.
Yeah, right? Look, you remember a lot from your high school class. So what you're referring to?
It's probably because it was the only Talmud we studied, right? It was like we studied like a sentence, spent like a semester on it. So
look, you're just in case not every listener knows. So you're referring to Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19, where the Torah says that it's forbidden to cut down fruit trees in war. And the example the Torah gives is of the Israelite army, which is making war on a city. And the city presumably has a wall around it. And in order to siege the city, the Israelite army would want to cut down the trees to make siege works or ramparts in order to scale the walls and conquer the city. And the Torah says that in order to make those siege works, it's forbidden to cut down the fruit trees, any fruit trees, in order to do that. And from that, so that's called Bal Tashchit. And that's a principle that the rabbis in the Talmud learn to be a much wider principle. It's not just about destroying fruit trees in war, but it refers to peacetime as well, and it refers to destroying or wasting anything of value to a person. So whether that's water or electricity or gasoline, we're not allowed to waste. And that's actually considered one of the 613 Jewish commandments, that are the commandments of the Bible. So in terms of our lives, we live in a time where there's incredible waste. There's waste of food. And the rabbis actually say, well, this is really about not wasting food because you don't cut down the fruit trees because the fruit trees will produce fruit. And so in our times, about a third of food in Western society is wasted. And so there's a lot of work we can do.
We did an episode about that, by the way.
And I saw that episode. It's a great episode. And it's amazing that, some people are trying to salvage food waste. And I actually have some neighbors who do dumpster diving. And, there's tons of food. And they actually, this is in Jerusalem. They live in West Jerusalem. And they give it to people in East Jerusalem. So there's also like a coexistence aspect of that work. And there's so much food that's wasted, and we in our own lives can make a difference in terms of how much food we take if we go to a buffet, in terms of whether we eat our leftovers or not. This is, how much food we waste is in our control.
I see. So how would you suggest, like, what is the first thing that, just your average Joe,
your average Jew,
your average Joseph can do to, curb his waste? because I think, like, for example, what you described earlier sounds pretty amazing, but it's something that might be a drastic change for a lot of people, right? It's all of a sudden, every time they think about going to takeout, they have to actually, because you have to go to the restaurant to give them your container. So that means you can't order food anymore. So what is, like, I mean, maybe that's what you think is the minimal, but what can someone do in their day-to-day life to curb their waste?
They're trying to bankrupt Walt. No, I understand.
Yeah, so Walt is this delivery system that in Tel Aviv, where people on bicycles or electric bikes are bringing around deliveries.
In plastic. Lots of plastic there.
It's like DoorDash.
Yeah, and or Uber Eats.
Or Uber Eats, yeah.
And so that food comes in multiple layers of plastic. There's the food itself. If you order a sandwich, so the sandwich is wrapped in paper, and then that paper comes in a bag, and that bag comes in another bag. And that's like one meal. That's like one person eating one meal, plus there's the carbon footprint of the motorcycle or car that brought that food to your door.
I'll say more than that. Every time I order a hamburger, I get a little bag with condiments that I don't want. And it's sometimes you even click, they have an option, they started putting an option in 10 Beast and Walt where you click no need for disposables, no need for condiments, whatever. But sometimes you click them and they still bring it because they don't even read it. They just throw it in. And then you end up getting all this stuff and, what are you going to do with it? So you throw it or, it stays in your fridge for 4 months until you throw it.
So good. So that's an example of how a green economy is actually a more profitable economy because there's a lot, waste costs companies money. For them to give you those condiments, every customer, that's, 5 shekels, $1.50. That depending on, the sushi, they give you like 6 different condiments. And so if you click that button and they actually don't give you the things you don't want, then that saves them money as well. So there's a way. So essentially, look, you're right that, many people may not be willing to forego their takeaway, especially in the coronavirus era. I'm putting ideas out there. And, maybe so, and some people order takeaway twice a day. So maybe they can order less, or maybe they can walk down the street with their own container and give them their container. Or, when we go back to eating in restaurants, one thing I do is I bring my own container to the restaurant because usually there's more food ordered than we can eat. And so the food either gets thrown out or we ask them to wrap it up. And then we get back to the containers, the disposables. But so when I bring my own container, so then that means that I'm trying to live, as little plastic waste as possible.
Yeah. It takes so much planning though.
But this is where I would say that sometimes the consumerist society and like the capitalist society and conglomeration actually has environmental benefits. So like there's a lot of, anti-capitalism wrapped up in the environmentalist movement today, at least in large parts of it. I don't want to make a generalization, but where I find that, so this little burger shop I order from, right? They're like, if they were this massive chain like McDonald's, they start counting every penny. And then they start making those things. And you see McDonald's, for example, McDonald's charges you 50 cents for barbecue sauce or for, ketchup or whatever. And so they give you incentive and the price comes into play. And okay, you have to think, do I actually want ketchup or do I not want ketchup? And that would be the smart way to go about it is to give a price to, you want a packet of ketchup, so I'll pay 10 aguot even. If I don't really want it, then I don't want it. For plastic bags.
For plastic bags. That was a huge debate. Very controversial law. They passed it, I think, 4 years ago, something like that. Because here in Israel, I don't know how it is in America, but here when you would go to the supermarket, you would celebrate on these plastic bags. Like, this is very Israeli, I think. You would take sometimes dozens of them because they were free and it was very convenient. And then they legislated this law that now you need to pay 10 cents.
10 cents.
For a plastic bag.
It's more like 2-3 cents.
I don't know if it
didn't
actually
stick.
It didn't.
They don't charge you.
No, they do. Of course they do.
But
They
not
charge.
really.
They do. They do charge you.
But they don't enforce it. They don't care.
They do care. They do charge you.
It depends. And
You don't go to regular store. You don't go to a regular supermarket.
I do. I go to Shufelsad. I go to AMPM.
AMPM is probably not.
They ask you how many bags. You tell them 2. You end up taking 4.
That's you, man.
They don't care.
That's because you were a thief. That's the second commandment.
No, but also
Don't steal.
I've taken 2 sometimes, and then you're like, "Can I take another one?" Because they already charged you. You realize it wasn't enough to hold everything. You're like, "Can I take another one?" They're like, "Yeah, whatever."
That's the ugly Israeli.
Yeah, although the law itself, has reduced the amount of plastic bags that people are taking at supermarkets.
Yeah.
So this is having an effect.
Yeah.
And people are bringing their reusable bags. Although that's another thing, is that some places now give these reusable bags instead of a plastic bag. You've probably seen this. In these. When I say reusable bag, I mean it's made out of. Some of them are actually made out of a type of plastic. Now those bags are actually they are durable bags, but you need to use them about 140 times in order for it to be worth not having used plastic bags. And so that's another thing of really trying to make our lives sustainable, is that we can't make those bags disposable, if you know what I mean.
I think someone needs to. This is my takeaway. Someone needs to write a book. Kahneman and Tversky and Richard Thaler, the behavioral economists. Someone needs to start a study, because, I mean, you're talking to 2 semi-libertarians, so it's very hard for me to get on board when it's like there's the government coercively taking action and saying a company has to charge money. But what I like is when there's Richard Thaler. He's this behavioral economist. He has this book called Nudge, and he talks about these nudges. The famous one is fly in the urinals in an Amsterdam airport. They found that men, we sometimes have problems with aim, and the bathrooms were getting dirty, and they wanted to find a way to cut down on costs. So they put a little fly in the urinal, right? A little drawing of a fly, and weirdly, men have this obsession to try and hit it. So they would hit the fly, and there would be less spillage, and they reduced costs for the cleaning in the airports. And so I think someone needs to write a book on how to nudge people to make better. Because I've taken those bags countless times, and I have just a pile of those bags in my home, because I was like, okay, I'm going to start taking a reusable bag to the supermarket, and then I forget. I leave the house and I don't remember. So I wonder, what is the thing I can do to make myself live a more environmentally conscious life?
Yeah, so that's actually part of Eco Bible. In addition to connecting theology and ecology, we also make it practical. So based on the 54 Torah portions, that the way the Jews divide up the 5 books of Moses, at the end of each Torah portion, we have suggested action items. This is practical things that you can do. And that's also part of why I feel like religion is so important here, because, many people don't want draconian regulation to change behavior. And that's part of the reason why, climate action has stalled, at least in the United States. It's important for religion to get on board, because religion is the biggest NGO in the world. And religious leaders have moral persuasion, and they can encourage people to do things that they might not otherwise do. In terms of what you said about, libertarian, one thing about the ecological crisis is that unless we live sustainably, none of us will be free. For example, you said lives a little while in Alabama. Alabama has had about 6 hurricanes in the past few months, the record hurricane season in the Atlantic and the Caribbean. And many people in southern Alabama, they're getting hit by a hurricane, and this is also true southern Louisiana, parts of Texas, the Florida Panhandle. There have been about 6 hurricanes that have come through there. And I read one person who said, look, I'm packing up and leaving. I can no longer live here. So if there's this American ethos of live free or die, but I don't think that liberty is more important than sustainability. Unless we have sustainability, we're not going to have liberty.
I think that's where a lot of the Americans have trouble getting on board. And where personally I would is that, it's hard to, even though there's this 97% consensus, and it's hard to say, I don't believe, and I think the Torah also preaches this, that none of us know the future. None of us know what the future holds. And the whole idea that like we're reaching a point of no return, and we saw it with the elections in 2016 and now again, no one really knows what's going to happen. And there's a problem to say, because
definitively
science, it's almost heretical in my eyes, if from a Jewish perspective, to like science is science and it deserves its respect, but it does not predict the future. It can't tell you what's going to happen in 50 or 100 years. And so to say because something is going to happen in 50 or 100 years and we know, it's almost false prophecy. And then it's to say, we're going to force people to take certain actions because of a false prophet. I mean, I don't know.
Look, what you just said is, the belief of many millions of people, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people believe what you just said. And, many religious people say, look, they have one argument is that only God can change the climate. Human beings can't do that. Another argument they say is that even if we do have an ecological crisis, we don't need to worry about it because the Messiah or God will just take care of it. They'll just, wave a wand and it'll all go away. Now, maybe that's the case, and I hope that's the case, but there's something called a precautionary principle, which is that with the potential that all of human life is at stake, and all 8 million species that God created is at stake because of the way that we're living now, including our children and our grandchildren, then we would find the will, the ratzon, the motivation to take action even when there's a small degree of uncertainty. And that's I studied in college with a climate scientist named Stephen Schneider of blessed memory, who was one of the early scientists in the 80s who testified before Congress. And he gave a metaphor of, it's like eating a piece of cake, a piece of chocolate cake. If someone comes up to you and says, there's a decent chance that you're going to get terrible food poisoning from eating that cake, would you eat it? And another thing is that the climate scientists have, with their computer models of what is likely to happen, they've actually been too conservative in those models. That's another thing that's been revealed in the past several years, that what climate scientists were saying would happen in 50 or 100 years, it's now showing up now. We just had a Hurricane Epsilon. There's more hurricanes this season in the Atlantic and the Caribbean than there's ever been since we've been recording hurricanes. The strongest hurricane or typhoon of the year just hit the Philippines. So, and Israel and the Eastern Mediterranean had the worst drought in 900 years. And that's part of what precipitated the civil war in Syria. Hundreds of thousands of Syrian farmers had nothing to eat, and they left their farms and they went to the cities, and that's part of what destabilized Syria. So it's really not about the future, about future predictions. It's about the here and the now, and whether we're going to wake up and address this crisis.
But the even in the Bible, climate crises are as old as time, can tell. Like, Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream to mean 7 years of famine and 7 years of plenty, and 7 years of famine in Egypt. So I think we can hardly say that was due to the Industrial Revolution. So, there's always been this, and I'm not. That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to diminish the suffering of human suffering, because I think that these hurricanes and these climate crises and these disasters are problematic. But are we envisioning and this, I guess, goes back to the question I started with, because I'm like split. On one hand, it's hard for me to get on board with the whole okay, we need to have this international convention on climate change that's going to address, because if we don't, then it's basically the day after tomorrow. Or, as opposed to, I'm all for living a life of sustainability and living an environmentally aware life and not, wasting for no purpose. But what I'm saying is unless do we really believe that there's going to be this day after tomorrow scenario? Otherwise, why can't we leave it up to just, humans to do what humans do, which is innovate and come up with solutions and be creative.
So first of all, I'd like to relate to what you said about Joseph and the famine and interpreting Pharaoh's dreams and those 7 years of famine. So look, the book of Genesis mentions many famines. God said to Abraham, Lech lecha, go to the land of Israel from Iraq. And Abraham gets here and there's a famine and he goes to Egypt. So according to the Jewish sages, there were 10 famines in the book of Genesis, even though it seems to only mention a few of them. But Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all experienced famine in their lifetime. So you're right that famine is definitely a part of human history. And we actually live in a time where there hasn't been famine in the Western world in 90 years, since the Great Dust Bowl of the 1930s. However, according to climate scientists, what we're experiencing now on this planet is different than anything that has happened in human history. And one of the main indicators for that is the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, it never exceeded 280 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. And now we're at 415 and rising, and we're likely to double pre-industrial levels. So and people will say, well, no, but millions of years ago that was the case. Well, that may have been the case millions of years ago when there wasn't, when life didn't look like this on the planet and when there weren't 8 billion human beings. But if we want to continue to live here and not revert to a situation where we've melted Antarctica and the northern ice cap and, everyone living within 50 miles or, a mile of the sea has to flee. I mean, look, we're here in Tel Aviv, 2 million people. 2 million people south of here live in Gaza. And then in Haifa, almost, that area, another close to 1 million people. Is everyone here just going to pick up and move inland? And what, we're going to ask the people in Jerusalem to just let, several million people move in with us? That's totally unrealistic.
Yeah. I just don't want to move to Jerusalem. That seems...
No offense.
Yeah, my sister lives in Jerusalem. I mean, it'd be nice to visit with her, but...
Now with the demonstrations, it's a nightmare. You can't commute.
So tell us a little bit more about how the practical suggestions in the Eco Bible and how we can implement them in our lives. What kind of steps can we take?
Give us the top 3.
Sure. So people sometimes ask me, well, what are the top 3 ecological impacts of our lifestyles? And I would say the number 1 is eating meat. How much meat and dairy and eggs do we eat? And that's a tough pill to swallow for many people because many people like eating animal products, whether it's dairy, eggs, or meat or fish, at every meal. However, there's a big ecological footprint from doing that. There's about 80 billion animals under factory farming, and that didn't exist when our Alter Zadie and Bubi were living in the shtetl.
Even fish is problematic?
Yeah, fish and seafood is problematic for different reasons, but many fish are being overfished in the world today.
But they breed them, no? They breed because I recently I moved mainly to fish. And I was thinking...
Is that better than eating mostly meat?
Look, the biggest ecological...
Give me something here, Rabbi. Yes. Give me something to hold on to.
Something to sink your teeth into.
Yes.
So, look...
A potato.
The biggest ecological impact comes from beef. And from dairy. From cow dairy. And that's because cows are an animal that has... that's able to eat grass, and it has a unique digestive system where it regurgitates that grass, and it has multiple stomachs. And in the process, it produces methane, which is a greenhouse gas that's about 60 times stronger than carbon dioxide in heating our planet. So if you want one thing to work on, that's beef and dairy. In terms of your question about fish and seafood, so a lot of fish now is coming from aquaculture. Even here in Israel, you see these big ponds between Netanya and Haifa. There's significant aquaculture. Else in the Galilee, there's aquaculture. Now you might think, well, these are just nice ponds that grow fish, but the reality is that these fish ponds, and there's also shrimp ponds and all sorts of other aquaculture ponds around the world, they actually have a significant ecological impact. They produce waste. The fish produce excrement, and then you have to do something with that, and that goes into the water stream. In other places, like in Argentina and Brazil and Thailand, Malaysia, they're cutting down the mandrakes, the mangrove forests, which are like the rainforests of the wetland ecosystem, in order to make way for these aquaculture to grow fish for people to buy at Costco, a salmon. So even fish has an ecological impact. That's why, at the highest level, a plant-based diet is the ideal, and that's actually what God commands in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 30, God says to people, eat plants. And the next verse, God says to animals, eat plants, and it was so, vayehi. And then God says, and behold, it was very good, tov ma'od. And why does God say it was...
That's amazing. I actually don't know this. So there in the creation story. So he commands to people and to, because I knew that there was a thing where that after Noah we started eating meat, but before Noah everybody was vegetarian or something. But I thought it was like a commentary, like it's actually in the Bible. It says eat vegetables.
Yeah, look, part of what we're doing with this Eco Bible commentary is just pointing out some things that are fairly obvious, overlooked. Ecological awareness is overlooked in religion. That's the reality today. And as a result, ecological awareness is overlooked within humanity since, as I said, 85% of people identify with a religion.
Okay.
So the verse says that God said to people, eat plants. And God didn't say a lot of things to people in the first chapter of Genesis, but this was one of the things. And God said that to animals as well. And according to one study, crocodiles from long time ago had herbivore teeth. They didn't have carnivorous teeth. Crocodiles apparently were vegetarians.
Okay, I must say I didn't relate to tip number 1. What's tip number 2?
But wait, I actually want to go into the. I mean, this is an episode about the Eco Bible. We can't not talk about the Bible.
But we asked for 3 tips.
Okay, I'll get to the tips in just a second.
Okay.
But I do want to ask about the Bible. Ooh, the Bible. Okay, so he commands the people to eat vegetables. When does that change and why?
So it changes with Noah, the generation of Noah. God destroyed the world because humanity was wicked, and following the flood, God says to Noah and his family who survived the flood, "Now you can eat meat." Now, there's different reasons that the rabbis give for why God gives this permission. According to one reason, Rabbi Hirsch says that the climate actually shifted on Earth. And while for the first 1,500 years of human history that the Bible records, people ate plants. So thereafter, the next few thousand years of human history that the Bible records, it wasn't suitable for sustaining that. And that actually may have been the case. It's, my ancestors lived in Lithuania, and that was difficult to subsist on a vegan diet. But in our times, Tel Aviv has close to 10% of vegans and vegetarians. It's a vegan capital of the world. And so it's a lot easier now to eat meat, to eat a plant-based diet. In terms of your question about the other 2 tips, so one is reconsider air travel and how much we travel.
I don't like tip number 2 as well.
Good. Look,
he loves traveling to Italy and eating creamy
beef.
Pasta with meat.
Yeah.
So it's a tough sell to this guy.
Look, if you wanted someone to come here and just tell you to, go to McDonald's and get gesundheit.
Drive a Hummer.
I don't know, reuse some bags.
It's not going to cut it, man. It's not going to cut it. Okay, so air travel?
Air travel, because airplanes are a very effective way of depositing carbon in the atmosphere. When people drive cars, part of that carbon gets absorbed into the ocean, or at least it has for the past 100 years, and some of it gets absorbed by trees. But an airplane is in the atmosphere, so 100% of that carbon stays in the atmosphere, and it stays there for 100 years. So it is going to impact multiple generations and heat the planet. Now, people might say, well, no, look, I can't cut out air travel. Okay, so then let's take a gradual approach. Think about how many times did you travel last year and how many times have you traveled this year? Most people have significantly reduced their air travel in the pandemic. And to be honest, a lot of people don't like the process of traveling. Of actually, getting to the airport, going through security, customs, getting on a plane, and all the more so now that you have to wear masks and that people are coughing. And so, look, here we live in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. It's a beautiful land. And
Have you been to Italy?
I've been to Italy multiple times, and part of my organization does work.
So you know.
Yeah, we do work with the Vatican because Pope Francis is actually, he has an encyclical, a book called Laudato Si, of where he essentially, it's like an environmental faith-based manifesto, which is very radical for many people, but is like very clear that, and it's not just Pope Francis, it's the Dalai Lama, it's the ecumenical patriarch of the Orthodox Church, it's many Hindu swamis, it's other Buddhist leaders like Thich Nhat Hanh, who wrote Love Letter for the Earth. And that also goes back to your earlier point of, well, like, with the climate scientists, like people arguing with them. Well, that's why, if you look at those religious leaders, the heavy hitters in religion, from the Pope to the Dalai Lama to Thich Nhat Hanh to the Swamis to Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs and Chief Rabbi David Rosen, these are people with amazing breadth of thinking who are the spiritual leaders of our generation. And each one of them is saying that we have an urgent ecological crisis that we need to deal with. So it's not just about the science, it's about religion and science coming together for the betterment of humanity.
And tip number 3?
Tip number 3 relates to gold. So the biggest ecological impact in a single moment in a person's life is at a wedding. When a gold ring is given to make official the marriage, that ring actually has a tremendous ecological footprint. How so? Because I grew up in California, and there was a gold rush. You probably heard of the 49ers.
Yeah, the Chaplin movie.
Yeah, and there was a gold rush in South Africa in the early 20th century. But in our times, there aren't gold rushes. You don't hear about people, going to some place and finding a huge load of gold. And that's because humanity has mined most of the big gold nuggets that exist. And so today, gold is mined in many places through a process called cyanide leach mining, where they go to an area where they know that there are gold filings, these little flicks of gold, specks of gold, and they take these huge truckfuls of earth and they pour a solution of water and cyanide over it in order to separate the gold filings from the dirt. And then they wash that dirt away and it goes in the rivers, and the cyanide water pollutes the people downstream and causes cancer to people. And so a gold ring is actually has a significant cyanide solution that comes with it.
But you can use a second-hand ring.
Amazing.
From your grandmother or your grand-grandmother.
Exactly. So that's an ecological solution to ask one's ancestors, living, can you give me a ring that you have, and then you can get it,
Sometimes she's buried with it, but you can solve that.
So, and actually what I did when...
It's not official advice, guys.
Right. So when I got married, I ordered a ring from a company in Texas that takes the gold in computers and melts them down and makes recycled rings.
That's so cool. What's their name?
Google
it.
Yeah.
Google it.
I gave it to her almost 14 years ago, so I forget.
It's really awesome.
Yeah.
It is really cool.
Yeah.
Like made out of all Apple ones.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of a commentary in the Eco Bible that gold is mentioned many times in the book of Exodus in relation to the clothing of the high priest. And the gold of the high priest was a place of holiness. And so we need to mimic that if we're going to use gold, by using it in a holy way that doesn't damage other people.
Or I can use silver. Or is it also...
Silver mining is also problematic for... Yeah.
Is there anything that I could... No, I'm kidding. But it's like...
Where's your ring, by the way? Why did you show it?
Because we're not going to get into it.
Oh my God.
I want Sean to be able to listen. No, I'm kidding. I lost it. I was with you in the car when I took it off and it fell between the handbrakes.
Yes.
Remember? That's the story I made up.
No, I remember this moment. Oh my
yeah,
God.
so it's still there. I couldn't find it. I searched for it
God.
for hours.
Okay.
Anyway, so
yeah, we gotta wrap things up.
But my last question is, I feel like almost anything, right? Because like almost anything you do, you can find some like negative ecological impact or even non-ecological impact. Like everything you do, it's like this the butterfly effect, right? Like everything you do in life might somehow impact someone negatively, sometimes more so, sometimes less so. And the question is like, how responsible are we for that? How, like how much are we supposed to constantly think about the far off, and how much of it is causation and how much of it is right? How much can we control what happens in the world by our individual actions?
It's an amazing question. The ecological crisis is a spiritual crisis. It's not about the birds and the bees or the trees and the toads. It's about how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. And we have many levels of soul awareness. In Hebrew, there are 5 levels according to the Kabbalistic teachings of Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chia, Yechida, these 5 different levels of soul. And actually, according to some Kabbalists, there's 25 levels because each of those 5 levels has its own 5 levels. And so consumer society today is operating at the lowest level. And so you're asking, well, do we really need to be concerned about what effect that I have on the world we live in? And from a spiritual perspective, the answer is yes. We're not supposed to live like bulls in a china shop, just sort of like smashing things and, throwing our waste and littering and leaving our waste. And, there was an Onion article that joked, they did this interview with, this mid-level business person and said, the biggest legacy of their life is their garbage. But that doesn't have to be. And part of the idea that we're bringing out through Eco Bible, which by the way is available on Amazon, both as a Kindle ebook.
I'm going to plug it officially.
Thank you.
Very soon.
Is that we can live at a higher level of soul awareness. And when we do that, we will actually be happier and we will cause less ecological impact to other people and to other species. And so, for example, just taking a walk out on the beach here in Tel Aviv, a walk along the ocean, along the sea, that's an act that has no ecological footprint and is spiritually nourishing. You get to see the grandeur of creation.
Unless they arrest you.
Oh, I hope not, especially if you're wearing a mask. And so that's an example, versus doing something of, going into a mall and just, buying stuff that we don't need. So that's showing that's transitioning to a spiritual, ecological lifestyle, I think is actually part of the evolution of humanity. It's sort of, we're at a do or don't moment. And I'll just finish with a story that the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison told of a young boy who came to an older woman with a bird in his hands. And he said to her, "Can you tell me whether the bird in my hands is alive or dead?" And she thought to herself for a minute, and she realized the boy was playing a trick on her. Because if she said that the bird was dead, the boy would open his hands and the bird would fly away and she would be wrong. And if she said the bird was alive, then he would close his hands and crush the bird, and either way she'd be wrong. He got her coming and going. And so she thought to herself for a minute, and she said to the young boy, "I don't know whether the bird in your hands is alive or dead. All I know is that the life of the bird is in your hands."
So the book, where can one buy the book?
The book is available on Amazon and Ingram and Kobo and iBooks, as an ebook.
Audio version?
We're going to come out with an audio version. We're soon coming out with a hardcover for libraries. And we're currently selling it for $1.99 on Amazon as the ebook.
And you get both volumes, or each volume is sold separately?
So we just published last week Volume 1 on Genesis and Exodus, and we're coming out in 2021 with Volume 2 on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Nice. So guys, stay tuned for that. Volume 2 of the Echo Bible, and you can get Volume 1 of the Echo Bible already on Amazon for $1.99. It's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. And without the waste. It's a digital, if you buy the digital version, it's...
Yes. Yes.
the most
So
friendly.
check them out. Also, you can find Yonatan Neril online. Do you have like Twitter or Facebook?
Yeah, we have a very active Facebook page. Also, the organization of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development that I direct.
Yeah.
It's an NGO.
It's an NGO.
You accept donations.
We do. Donations here in Israel are tax deductible, in the U.S. as well.
So look them up. Again, the name of the NGO.
The Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, interfaithsustain.com.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you both.
It was amazing. Before we go, we're sponsored by The Forward. Check them
Yes.
out. Please go to forward.com/2njb, subscribe, and thus help us keep going because this supports the show.
Yeah, and
So-
you also get great content. Forward.com/2njb. You get an exclusive discount for our listeners. You get 67% off, like 6 months for $10. So check them out. Forward.com/2njb.
Yes.
Great articles, opinions, news,
Highly
all
recommended.
through a Jewish lens.
Also, Arutz Sheva, IsraelNationalNews.com. Check them out for amazing content in English from the Israeli perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And
And lastly, if you want the Australian perspective, go to ajn.timesofisrael.com, Australian Jewish News. We also have a collaboration with them, so check them out, ajn.timesofisrael.com.
yes, and also we accept donations. So if you want to help us out, go to twinjb.com/donate. And that is it.
Thank you so much. That
Thanks.
was really a fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Good luck with the book.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.